Nancy Guthrie has been missing now for nearly 2 months. Her family is making a new emotional plea for answers. They're asking her Tucson neighbors to think back about any detail, no matter how small, that could help break this case. Here's ABC's Alex Stone.
Tonight, a new plea for answers from Nancy Guthrie's family. The search for the 84-year-old entering its 7th week without many clues pointing toward who took Guthrie or if she's alive. For weeks, Savannah Guthrie asking the public for help.
We need to know where she is. We need her to come home.
And tonight, a new statement. Nancy Guthrie's children writing, quote, "We miss our mom with every breath, and we cannot be in peace until she is home. We want to celebrate her beautiful and courageous life, but we cannot do that until she is brought to a final place of rest." Earlier this month, the sheriff in Pima County saying his department continues to analyze evidence in the case. The most solid clue continues to be this video from Guthrie's front doorbell camera showing a masked man with a gun on his hip early on February 1st when she went missing. In recent weeks, the FBI recovered additional imagery from Guthrie's cameras, according to sources, but they say the cameras recorded nothing suspicious.
Someone out there knows something that can bring her home.
Tonight, Guthrie's family is making another call for tips to be turned in. They write, "We desperately ask this community for renewed attention to our mom's case. Please consult camera footage, journal notes, text messages, observations, or conversations that in retrospect may hold significance."
She had done everything right that night. She had sat at her daughter's table, eaten a warm meal, laughed the way old women laugh when they are surrounded by people who love them. Unhurried, certain, full. She had let someone she trusted drive her home and walk her to the front door. She had gone inside. She had locked up. She had gone to bed in the house she had slept in for 41 years. The house that knew the shape of her footsteps before she even crossed the threshold. The house where her grandchildren had smeared birthday cake on the furniture. The house that had held her through widowhood and desert summers, and the quiet dignity of a life built slowly, carefully, and completely on her own terms. She closed her eyes at 84 years old, and someone was already waiting in the dark. No shattered glass. No overturned furniture. No screams bleeding through the walls into the desert night. Just the soft, precise violence of a plan, engineered in advance, rehearsed more than once, and executed with a patience that is somehow more chilling than any act of rage could ever be. A camera ripped from its mount in the early hours of the morning, by hands that knew exactly where it was. And then, silence. The kind of silence that only arrives after something irreversible has already happened. By the time the sun climbed above the Catalina Mountains, those ancient, indifferent peaks that have watched over Tucson for 10,000 years without blinking, she was already gone, and not a single person on earth knew it yet. Her family only found out because she missed church. Not a 911 call, not a neighbor who heard something wrong. A virtual church service, a familiar face that never appeared on a screen. That is the window between the moment she was taken and the moment anyone was allowed to start looking. 12 full hours. 12 hours of open desert highway. 12 hours during which a border crossing sits less than 90 minutes to the south. 12 hours that may as well have been a lifetime. I have covered a lot of cases on this channel. Cases that kept me up at 3 in the morning. Cases that followed me into rooms I thought were safe, but this one sits differently, heavier, somehow, and sharper at the edges. Maybe it is because she is somebody's mother, somebody's grandmother. Maybe it is because the people who are supposed to have answers have been handing us half-truths dressed up in the language of press conferences. Maybe it is because the longer I look at this case, the more clearly I see a shape in the darkness. A shape that nobody in a position of authority seems prepared to name out loud. I am prepared to name it. What you are about to see is not conjecture pulled from a comment section. It is a chain of documented, verified, cross-referenced facts. Facts that the people running this investigation chose, deliberately, not to tell you in full. One of those facts was delivered inside an official FBI statement on camera to the entire country, by a man who already knew it was not the complete truth when he said it. I want you to hold that thought, because by the time this video is over, you will understand exactly why. There are 2 DNA profiles in this case, 2 unknown men, neither of them in any law enforcement database on the planet. There is a glove in a field 2 miles from her home. There is a camera that was disabled in the pre-dawn hours by someone who walked toward it the way you walk towards something familiar, the way you move towards something you have passed 100 times before, with the casual, unhesitating confidence of a person who belongs there. This was not a stranger. This was not random. And the last person to see her alive, the person whose silence over the past 25 days has grown so loud it has started to sound like something else entirely, has not said a single public word since the night she disappeared. Not one word. Before we go any further, this video contains detailed discussion of an active kidnapping investigation, including forensic evidence, DNA analysis, and information that some viewers may find deeply distressing, particularly those sensitive to content involving violence against elderly individuals or missing persons cases. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. If you are new here, welcome to the Whispered Crimes. This channel exists to give the voiceless a voice in the buried a name. We don't sensationalize, we don't speculate without evidence. We follow the facts, even when the facts are uncomfortable. Especially then. Hit subscribe and ring that notification bell, because the follow-up video to this one is going to reveal information that will completely reframe everything you are about to watch. And drop a comment right now telling me where in the world you are watching from. I read every single one. Now, let's get into it. Nancy Ellen Long was born on January 27, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky, in a small city just across the Ohio River from Cincinnati. She attended the University of Kentucky, contributed to the student newspaper there, and met Charles Errol Guthrie on a blind date at a Kentucky basketball game. She married him on December 28, 1963. Charles was a mining engineer, and his work took them far, including a stint in Melbourne, Australia, where Savannah was born in December 1971. The family moved to Tucson, Arizona in 1973 and put down roots in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood. They never left. On June 10, 1988, Charles died suddenly of a heart attack during a work trip to Mexico. He was 49. Nancy was 46. Savannah was 16, about to start her senior year of high school. From that point forward, Nancy raised her 3 children alone. She took a job in the public relations department at the University of Arizona, where she worked until 2007. Her children later said they made an unspoken pact after their father died. Whoever was in college would make sure one of them came home on weekends so Nancy would not be alone. She raised 3 children who each built something distinct. Cameron Guthrie, Colonel Charles Cameron Guthrie, call sign Arlo, is a retired F-16 fighter pilot who served 26 years with the Vermont Air National Guard's Green Mountain Boys before retiring from military flying in 2018. Annie Guthrie is a writer, jeweler, published poet, and instructor at the University of Arizona Poetry Center, the author of a 2015 poetry collection called The Good Dark. And Savannah Guthrie is the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, one of the most watched morning programs in America. When her mother disappeared, Savannah stepped away from the broadcast immediately, including from the Today Show's coverage of the 2026 Winter Olympics. She is returning to the anchor desk on April 6th, Easter Monday. By the time Nancy disappeared, she was 84 years old. Pacemaker, daily medication, high blood pressure, limited mobility. Sheriff Chris Nanos told reporters plainly that she could not walk 50 yards on her own, but she had no cognitive impairments. Every person who knew her described the same woman, mentally sharp, fiercely independent in her thinking, and completely certain about who she was. She had lived in the same house in the Catalina Foothills since 1985. 41 years, same address, same neighborhood, same Friday night routine. Whoever planned what happened on January 31st did not find Nancy Guthrie by accident. Gosh, they knew exactly where she was, exactly when she would be home, and exactly what her evenings looked like. That is where this story goes next. The last Friday of January 2026 looked like every other Friday in Nancy Guthrie's life. She called an Uber. At 5:32 in the afternoon, the car arrived, and Nancy rode it to Annie's house for dinner. She did not drive herself anywhere anymore. At 84, with a heart condition requiring daily management and mobility that had narrowed her world considerably, She relied on others to get around. An Uber to dinner, a son-in-law to bring her home, a friend's house on Sunday mornings to watch a church service together over a live stream. Those were the fixed coordinates of her week. Annie Guthrie and her husband Tommaso Cioni were waiting when she arrived. The three of them sat down together, ate a meal, played games. Annie later told investigators there were no red flags that night. Nothing felt off, no tension, no strange behavior, nothing that signaled this evening was different from any other. It was routine in every way. Around 9:45 to 9:48 in the evening, Tommaso got up and drove Nancy home. The trip took roughly 10 minutes. The garage door security footage records exactly what happened next. The door opened at 9:48 p.m. and closed 2 minutes later at 9:50 p.m. That 2-minute window is the last confirmed moment Nancy Guthrie entered her own home. Tommaso told investigators he waited until she was safely inside before he left. Then he drove back to his own house. The evening ended. Everything was normal. Then came the silence. Between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m. the following morning, there is no recorded activity at the property. Not a camera alert, not a motion trigger, not a pacemaker anomaly. 4 hours of unbroken quiet at a house that was, within those same 4 hours, becoming the target of someone who had chosen their moment carefully. That silence is not a gap in the evidence. It is part of the evidence. Someone who acts on impulse does not wait nearly 4 hours after the last visitor leaves. The timing of 1:47 a.m. was selected. The deep middle of the night, long after neighbors are asleep. Long after any traffic on those desert roads has thinned to nothing. That window was not accidental. At 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, Nancy's Nest doorbell camera went offline. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed this was neither a power failure nor a technical malfunction. Someone physically disconnected it. That deliberate act, requiring direct hands-on contact with the device, is the first confirmed operational move of the abduction. 25 minutes later, at 2:12 a.m., a second camera elsewhere on the property activated. Its motion sensor logged a detection event and classified it as a person. There was no video. Nancy had no active cloud subscription on any of her cameras. The devices could detect movement and record a system log entry. But without a paid cloud recording service, there was nothing to capture. Whatever that second camera registered at 2:12 a.m. exists only as a time-stamped event in the system data, a record of a presence with no image attached to it. 16 minutes after that, at 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker application lost its Bluetooth connection to her Apple devices. Her phone was still on a table inside the house when the family arrived hours later. Her purse was there. Her medication was there. The belongings of her daily life were exactly where they should have been. Nancy was taken in her pajamas, the camera going dark at 1:47 a.m. and the pacemaker disconnecting at 2:28 a.m. are the two operational markers of this abduction. Everything that was done to Nancy Guthrie happened inside that 41-minute window. Investigators have consistently treated that duration as significant. A straightforward removal, get in, subdue, exit, does not take 41 minutes. It takes a fraction of that. 41 minutes means complications. It means waiting for transport to be in position, managing resistance, gathering specific items, or coordinating with someone else. And the extended window inside that house is one of the details this investigation has never fully explained publicly. The family found out at noon the following day. Nancy had a standing Sunday routine she had kept since the COVID pandemic. Every week she gathered with a small group of friends to watch a live stream of Savannah's New York church service. On February 1st, she did not arrive at her friend's house as expected. The friend contacted Annie. Relatives went to Nancy's home around 11 a.m., searched the house and surrounding property, found no sign of her, and called 911 shortly before noon. Police arrived at 12:15 p.m. and determined the circumstances were concerning enough to escalate immediately. The missing persons report came roughly 12 hours after the pacemaker went silent. 12 hours is not an abstract figure in a case like this. The Mexican border sits less than 90 minutes south of Tucson by road. Los Angeles is a 7-hour drive. El Paso is under 4. In the first 2 weeks of the investigation, with hundreds of agents deployed and tens of thousands of tips processed, not a single confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie was reported anywhere. The 12-hour head start is the primary reason why. Whoever took her had the better part of a night and all of a morning to put distance between themselves and that house before anyone knew to start looking. The timeline from the garage door closing at 9:50 p.m. to the pacemaker going silent at 2:28 a.m. is the forensic foundation of this entire case. Every thread that followed, the DNA, the camera footage, the ransom notes, the suspect description, runs back to what happened inside that house during those hours. What investigators found when they walked through the front door on February 1st is where this story goes next. When investigators walked through the front door of Nancy Guthrie's Catalina Foothills home on the afternoon of February 1st, 2026, what they found was not the scene of a panicked intruder. It was something more unsettling than that. The house was, according to a law enforcement source who later spoke to News Nation's Brian Enton, very, very clean. The main living areas showed no obvious signs of a violent confrontation. Most of the rooms were described as immaculate. And yet on the front porch there was blood. That blood was confirmed through DNA testing to belong to Nancy Guthrie. It was found in a droplet pattern near the entrance. Not a smear, not a drag trail. Former FBI profiler Jim Clemente, speaking to Brian Enton in a March 2026 interview, analyzed that specific pattern and said it was consistent with someone walking and bleeding, not someone mortally wounded or dragged. His read was that Nancy was probably still alive when she left the house. The doorbell camera had been physically removed from its mount, and at the back of the property, 2 doors had been propped open. Savannah Guthrie confirmed the propped doors publicly in her Today Show interview with Hoda Kotb. She said when her family arrived at the house, the first thing they thought was that paramedics had come during the night for a medical emergency because the back doors were open. That is how deliberate it looked. Former Pima County SWAT commander Bob Krieger analyzed that detail for Brian Enton, investigates on News Nation, and was precise about what it means. His words, "For me, it's a quick way in and a quick way out. Just one less thing you have to think about. Opening the door, you don't want it closing behind you and maybe automatically locking." His theory is that Nancy was restrained inside the home and then carried out, with the back doors propped to eliminate any obstacle on exit. He added that it could have been one person or two, but Krieger also addressed the contradiction the scene creates. The terrain behind Nancy's house is desert brush, cacti, and trees so dense that from the back of the property you can barely see the house itself. His direct quote, "There's no way they're bringing her back this way. If they got there that way, they clearly had to go out the front." The blood droplets on the front porch confirm his instinct. The blood and the terrain both point to a front exit. The back doors were propped open, possibly as a contingency, an alternate route that was staged but never used. Investigators have not publicly addressed the contradiction. It remains unexplained. Inside the house, biological material was recovered that did not belong to Nancy, did not match anyone in her family, and did not match anyone known to her. That sample was sent to a private laboratory in Florida for analysis. CBS News reported that investigators were concerned the sample might be too mixed with Nancy's own DNA to yield a clean, usable profile. That mixing is the result of close physical contact, the kind that occurs during a forcible removal of one person by another. And the lab is still working through it. The process is expected to take months, possibly close to a year. A glove was found in a field approximately 2 miles from the home. It was one of 16 gloves collected in the broader search, but the FBI confirmed that one of them appeared to visually match the gloves worn by the suspect in the doorbell footage. DNA from an unknown male was extracted from it, run through CODIS, the FBI's National Criminal Database, and came back with no match. It was also cross-referenced with the biological material recovered from inside the house. No match there either. Investigators then pursued genealogical testing. That process ultimately traced the glove DNA to a local restaurant worker who works in the area near Nancy's home. Sheriff Nanos confirmed it publicly to Tucson station KVOA. The owner of that glove was found working at a restaurant across the street from the search area. He has no connection to the case. The glove that looked like the most promising physical lead in the investigation turned out to be unrelated. That left the biological material inside the house as the only remaining DNA thread. And that sample is still in the Florida lab, still being separated, still waiting to become usable. On February 12th, investigators released an updated physical description of the suspect captured in the doorbell footage. He is approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall. Average build, a black mustache visible beneath his mask. He was wearing a black ski mask, black nitrile gloves, and dark clothing. He was armed, with what appeared to be a gun in a holster. Before removing the camera entirely, he had first tried to disable it by lightly tapping the lens. And when that did not work, he covered the camera with vegetation pulled from a potted plant near the door. FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed that despite those attempts, the data was recovered from residual information in back-end systems through cooperation with private technology companies. The backpack he was carrying is a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. CBS News was first to confirm the detail that made it significant as a lead. That model is sold exclusively at Walmart. Sheriff Nanos called it one of the most promising leads in the case. Walmart provided records of all Ozark Trail hiker pack purchases, both online and in-store, from the prior several months, covering sales across Arizona and beyond. Investigators have been reviewing surveillance footage from Walmart locations to match purchases to faces. The sheriff cautioned publicly that while the backpack is exclusive to Walmart, it could have been purchased secondhand, which means the record trail may not be complete. The holster generated its own investigative thread. It is a belly band-style holster worn in an unusual position, near the center of the waist rather than the hip, described by FBI Director Patel as positioned over the crotch area. News Nation reported the holster is a $10 model available at Walmart. Sheriff Nanos described it publicly as having pretty unique characteristics and said directly, "If the person who bought it paid with a credit card, the case is over." The FBI visited gun stores across the Tucson area, bringing a list of 40 names and photographs and asking store employees whether any of those individuals had been in the store or made purchases. Agents also visited a Tucson gun store with printed sheets asking about purchases over the prior year. One store owner confirmed the visit to CBS News but asked not to be identified. Every piece of physical evidence at that scene tells the same story. The blood near the front door, the removed camera, the propped back doors staged as a contingency, the biological material indicating close contact, the equipment assembled cheaply and carried with enough operational awareness to attempt camera disabling before the removal even began. None of this was improvised. The person who walked into Nancy Guthrie's house on February 1st had planned it. And what the doorbell camera captured of how he moved when he arrived there makes the depth of that preparation even clearer. 9 days after Nancy Guthrie was reported missing, FBI Director Kash Patel posted a message on his personal X account and told the country he had something to show them. On February 10th, 2026, Patel released 6 black and white photographs and 3 video clips recovered from Nancy's Nest doorbell camera. He wrote that over the previous 8 days, the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department had been working closely with private sector partners to recover images and video from Nancy's home that may have been lost, corrupted, or inaccessible due to a variety of factors, including the physical removal of recording devices. He stated directly that the video was recovered from residual data located in back-end systems. His post described the footage as showing an armed individual appearing to have tampered with the camera at Nancy Guthrie's front door the morning of her disappearance. The release landed like a signal flare in a case that had gone 9 days without a public image of a suspect. Thousands of tips followed within hours. For a nation watching this story, it felt like a break. One night, one visit, one masked man at the door. But local investigators in Tucson were not celebrating. CNN reported through a law enforcement source that investigators on the ground were taken aback by the release. They had hoped to keep specific details of one image confidential while working to identify the suspect. Those investigators were also puzzled by an operational detail. FBI headquarters had insisted the footage be posted from Patel's personal X account rather than the general FBI account. That is an unusual choice for evidence of this sensitivity. The local team had not been informed of what headquarters was planning to release. What they were concerned about was one image in particular. ABC News was first to report it, and CBS News, CNN, and Fox News each confirmed it independently through their own sources inside the investigation. The photograph showing the suspect without his backpack and without a visible holster was not from the morning of February 1st. It was from a different date, an earlier visit. Sources told CNN the man without a backpack appeared to have been at the door, possibly weeks before the abduction, appearing to surveil the property. The image of the armed, equipped suspect in full kit was from February 1st. The image of the same man standing at the door without equipment was from a separate occasion. The FBI had both images. They released them together, framed under a single description, the morning of her disappearance, without distinguishing the dates. The Pima County Sheriff's Department pushed back formally. Their written statement read, "There is no date or timestamp associated with these images, and any suggestion that the photographs were taken on different days is purely speculative." Sheriff Nanos echoed that position to NBC News, though he stopped short of fully denying the underlying claim. The FBI did not respond to requests for comment on the date question. The reason January 11th became a flagged date in this investigation connects directly to this image. NBC News correspondent Liz Kreutz reported in late March that Sheriff Nanos explained what happened. When investigators reached out to Google while trying to recover footage from the Nest camera, Google initially told them the image of the suspect without a backpack was from January 11th. That is why investigators asked neighbors to submit footage specifically from January 11th between 9 p.m. and midnight. Later, however, Google told investigators they could not confirm the exact date of that image. Nanos subsequently withdrew the specific January 11th footage request. The flagged date that had been generating significant public and investigative attention turned out to rest on information that could not be verified. What remained confirmed regardless of the date dispute is what the footage shows about how this person moves. When the suspect approaches Nancy's front door in the released video, he does not slow to look for the camera. He does not scan the wall or sweep the area around the door. He walks directly to it in a straight, uninterrupted path. His hand reaches toward the lens before he has stopped moving. The motion is already underway as he arrives. CNN's chief law enforcement and intelligence analyst John Miller described the footage as fitting with pre-operational surveillance and reconnaissance. Criminal profilers use the term ownership behavior for this pattern, the physical signature of someone navigating a familiar space without needing to consciously locate anything in it. What you do not search for a light switch you have used 100 times. The video shows a 27-second clip of the suspect approaching the front door and raising his gloved hand toward the camera. A second 14-second clip shows him facing the camera with what appears to be a flashlight held in his mouth, before covering the lens with vegetation pulled from a potted plant near the door. When the initial hand-to-lens approach did not disable the camera, he adapted immediately. He did not repeat the same motion or hesitate. He reached for the plant and covered it. That adaptive response, primary method, evaluation, secondary method, no panic, is not improvisation. It is contingency planning. Someone who has thought through what to do if the first approach fails. On February 18th, Google announced it was working to extract additional footage from other cameras at the property. Those cameras had no active cloud subscriptions. No automatic backup had been running. As of April 2026, no additional usable footage from those secondary cameras has been publicly confirmed as recovered. What Patel released on February 10th, framed as footage from a single morning, was sourced from at least 2 separate visits. Multiple law enforcement sources confirmed that to multiple networks. The sheriff called it speculative. The FBI stayed silent, and the January 11th date that investigators had been asking the public about turned out to rest on a Google data point that was later walked back as unconfirmable. The scouting timeline, how far back the suspect's visits actually go, and what else the cameras may have captured, is the subject of the next chapter. The footage the FBI released on February 10th showed what happened at Nancy's front door. It did not show everything that happened before it. To understand how this suspect arrived on February 1st walking forward, upright and without hesitation, having already adapted and recovered from an earlier visit, you have to go further back. Because the evidence suggests someone had been moving through the edges of this neighborhood for weeks before that night. The Pima County Sheriff's Department made an unusual request early in the investigation. They asked residents near Nancy's home to submit any surveillance footage going as far back as January 1st. Well, that kind of reach, a full month before the abduction, is not standard in a missing persons case. It tells you investigators believe the preparation window was long. Within that broader request, they specifically flagged two windows through an alert posted on the Ring Neighbors app. The first was January 31st between 9:30 a.m. and 11 a.m., the morning of the day Nancy disappeared. The second was January 11th between 9 p.m. and midnight. January 11th is 3 weeks before the abduction. That date was never explained at any press conference. Sheriff Nanos addressed it in a March interview with NBC News correspondent Liz Kreitz, revealing that Google had initially told investigators the image of the suspect without his backpack may have been from January 11th. That is what prompted the specific request for footage from that date. Google later told investigators the exact date of that image could not be confirmed, and Nanos subsequently withdrew the specific January 11th footage request. But the Guthrie family's March 21st public statement to KVOA still specifically named January 11th alongside January 31st and the early hours of February 1st as key dates the community should search their memories around. The family would not have included it without reason. Whatever investigators know about activity on that night has not been fully shared publicly. 8 days before Nancy disappeared, something happened across town that investigators took seriously. On January 23rd, a homeowner in Tucson posted footage to the Ring Neighbors app showing a dark-haired man with a goatee at their front door in the early hours of the morning. He appeared at approximately 3:30 a.m. Hunrayan returned to the same door at approximately 5 a.m. The property is 6.5 miles from Nancy's home in the Catalina Foothills. It sits in the same northern Tucson suburbs, isolated desert terrain with long driveways, minimal street lighting under the area's dark sky ordinances, and the same brand of consumer doorbell camera technology. The man was walking backward toward the door. When he reached it, he rang the doorbell, while still maintaining his backward orientation. Then when the homeowner's dogs began barking inside, he fled. This is not a casual or accidental detail. It requires explaining precisely because its significance depends on understanding exactly how consumer doorbell cameras work. Ring and Nest cameras are not recording continuously. They are motion activated. When the passive infrared sensor detects a heat signature or movement, it wakes the processor, adjusts the lens to the ambient light level, establishes a connection with the cloud server, and begins recording. That sequence takes between 1 and 2 seconds. During that activation window, the camera captures whatever is directly in front of the lens. If a person approaches face forward, those startup frames capture their face. If a person approaches backward, those frames capture only the back of their head. By the time the camera is fully active and recording at full quality, the face is already turned away from the lens. The person has exploited the hardware delay with their body position. The man at the January 23rd property understood this. When the dogs barked and he fled, he did not turn toward the sound. Like a person startled by sudden noise turns instinctively toward its source. It is a reflex. This man suppressed it. He maintained his backward orientation even as he ran, keeping his face away from the lens all the way out of the camera's field of view. That level of consistent practiced discipline under pressure is not improvised. It is rehearsed behavior. TMZ broke the story and confirmed through a high-ranking law enforcement source connected to the investigation that the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department were aware of the footage and treating it as a potential lead. TMZ also noted the man's facial hair appeared similar to what was visible on the suspect in the FBI-released images at Nancy's home. The dark hair and facial structure visible beneath the mask. Investigators have not formally confirmed the man in the January 23rd footage is the same person who appeared at Nancy's front door, and no official link between the two has been publicly established. The location of that property is significant for reasons beyond the footage itself. It is 6.5 miles from Nancy's home, far enough that an encounter there would not immediately draw a connection to the Catalina Foothills address. But the terrain, the camera technology, the neighborhood structure, and the environmental conditions are near identical to the real target. Same dark sky ordinances, same isolated desert driveways, same response time if someone called for help. It is exactly the kind of location an investigator would choose if they needed to test a specific technique without exposure at the actual target. By the time the suspect walked forward and direct toward Nancy's front door on February 1st, the backward walking anxiety visible on January 23rd was entirely gone. Whatever he learned that morning, that the camera captured only the back of his head, that the dogs barked but nobody came out, that the neighborhood stayed quiet, had already been absorbed. Investigators also reviewed surveillance footage and interviewed staff at a local restaurant Nancy had visited in the days before January 31st. That review was part of the broader effort to determine whether she had been tracked in her daily movements before the night of the dinner, and not just at her home address. No public results from that review have been announced. 3 weeks of documented movement, a flagged date still not fully explained. Shown a rehearsal property 6.5 miles from the target, where a backward walking technique was tested under pressure and executed without a confirmed facial identification. A prior visit to Nancy's actual front door captured on camera. By the time the suspect arrived on February 1st, nothing he did was improvised. Every element of that night had been considered in advance. What he did in the days after, the messages he sent to the media, and the demands he made. You have just seen the preparation phase of this case. 3 weeks of scouting, a rehearsal property 6.5 miles from the target, a backward walking technique practiced and tested under pressure, and an FBI release that packaged footage from 2 separate visits and presented it to the country as one night. This is the Whispered Crimes. If you are not subscribed, want to do it now, because the follow-up video goes deeper into what investigators have not told the public, and you do not want to come back and find you missed it. Hit the bell and drop a comment right now telling me where in the world you are watching from. I read every single one. Within hours of Nancy's disappearance becoming public, the communications started arriving. TMZ received the first ransom demand. It demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin and included a specific cryptocurrency wallet address for payment. At the same time, 2 Tucson television stations received similar communications. KOLD, the CBS affiliate, and KGUN, the ABC affiliate, both received versions of the demand. The notes contained specific details about Nancy's home that had not been made public at that point. As law enforcement sources confirmed to CNN on February 5th that those details included references to Nancy's Apple Watch and a damaged floodlight at the property. Only someone with direct knowledge of the house and of Nancy's personal belongings could have included those details. Investigators formally requested that the contents of the letters not be publicly disclosed, and CBS News confirmed they were taking the communications seriously. The first ransom note carried a deadline. It set a payment date of 5 p.m. on Thursday, February 6th. When that deadline passed without any transaction, a second deadline was issued for Monday, February 9th at 5 p.m. local Tucson time. That deadline also passed. The family said publicly they were prepared to pay. Savannah posted a video over the weekend saying, "We will pay." On the Monday deadline, Savannah Guthrie posted another plea urging whoever had Nancy to make contact. "We want to talk to you, and we are waiting." Nobody responded. Then came the Bitcoin wallet activity on approximately February 10th, around 5 p.m. Arizona time, there was a transaction in the cryptocurrency wallet listed in the ransom note. A Zede family confirmed the transaction. TMZ's Harvey Levin reported activity in the account, but declined to disclose the amount. Fortune consulted a blockchain forensics expert who said the payment could potentially expose information about whoever set up the wallet. However, no official confirmation was ever provided that the wallet was actually tied to the kidnappers, or that the ransom communications themselves were authentic. The transaction's origin and significance remained publicly unconfirmed. A second note received by TMZ later in the investigation took a different angle. It came from someone claiming not to be the kidnapper, but to have information about who was responsible. The sender demanded 1 Bitcoin, worth approximately $66,000 at the time, in exchange for the name. TMZ forwarded it to the FBI. Its authenticity was never established. Then came the exploitation. On February 4th, moments after Savannah and her siblings posted their first joint video publicly asking for proof of life, Annie Guthrie and her husband Tommaso Cioni each received a text message from a number with a 760 area code. The message read, "Did you get the Bitcoin? We're waiting on our end for the transaction." 3 minutes later, a family member received a 9-second phone call from the same number. Investigators traced the number to a VoIP application, a service that allows users to generate a separate phone number on their device, and found the account was registered to a Gmail address belonging to Derek Colella, 42, of Hawthorne, California. When interviewed after being read his Miranda rights, Colella admitted sending the messages. He told investigators he was trying to see if the family would respond. He was arrested on February 5th. On February 6th, he appeared in U.S. District Court in Santa Ana before Judge Karen E. Scott, was charged with transmitting a demand for ransom in interstate commerce and using a telecommunications device to abuse, threaten, or harass, and was released on $20,000 bond. His messages were not linked to the original Ransom Communications that arrived at media outlets. FBI Special Agent in charge, Heath Jonke, was direct. Colella had no connection to the actual disappearance. He was an opportunist who watched the news coverage and decided to see what happened if he sent a message. The ransom situation as a whole presents two unresolved possibilities. The first is that whoever actually has Nancy is sufficiently aware of law enforcement digital surveillance to avoid making any financial move that could be traced, in which case the apparent inactivity following the initial wallet activity is deliberate. The second is that the ransom communications were never intended to result in a transaction at all, but were constructed to anchor investigative attention around a financial motive while something else was happening entirely. The insider knowledge in the letters, the Apple Watch, the damaged floodlight, rules out a random opportunist. Whoever sent those original notes had been inside that house, or had access to someone who had. No proof of life was ever confirmed, not a photograph, not a video, not a verified communication establishing Nancy was alive. The family waited. Nobody called back, and as the ransom trail went cold, investigators kept returning to the one person who had walked Nancy to her front door just 4 hours before the camera went dark. The last person to see Nancy Guthrie alive is a 50-year-old educator from Tuscany named Tommaso Cioni. He was born on June 18, 1975, in San Giovanni Valdarno, a medieval town in the province of Arezzo, Italy. He moved to the United States in 2006 and has lived in Tucson ever since. He is married to Annie Guthrie. They have one son. He teaches 6th grade and AP biology at Basis Oro Valley, a rigorous charter school in Tucson, where according to his LinkedIn profile, he has worked for more than 15 years. In a 2015 profile posted by the school on Facebook, he was asked what he loved most about teaching. He said he loved being able to share his passion for learning with his students, watching them grow from preteens to young adults, and seeing them express their potential. His wife Annie described him in a 2013 interview with Women's Quarterly Conversation as her greatest teacher. She said he writes poetry with his lifestyle. Outside the classroom, he plays electric bass and sings in a local Tucson band called Early Black, a rock, post-punk, and shoegaze group he has been part of since 2007. He writes when he has the chance. He studies lizards. He forages for mushrooms when he visits Italy. He makes homemade pasta. He was not a public figure in any sense before February 2026. On the evening of January 31st, Tommaso drove Nancy home from dinner. The garage door opened at 9:48 p.m. and closed 2 minutes later. He told investigators he confirmed she was safely inside before he left. From that moment forward, he cooperated with investigators from the very beginning. He answered questions. He provided access. He did not place preconditions on his cooperation. For weeks, he made no public statement of his own. The first documented moment he spoke on camera was captured in footage that circulated online around March 17, allegedly filmed by a true crime content creator outside his home. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer shared the clip on X and identified the man as Cioni. In it, he addressed whoever was filming and said, "Please leave me alone." That was his entire public statement over more than 6 weeks. Journalist Ashley Banfield reported, based on an unnamed source, that Cioni might be a prime suspect in the investigation. The report spread rapidly. The Pima County Sheriff's Department pushed back formally and publicly. Sheriff Nanos issued a statement on February 16th, clearing the entire Guthrie family, all siblings and their spouses, saying explicitly that to suggest otherwise was not only wrong, it was cruel. On March 16th, former SWAT officer Chad Ayers appeared on the Megyn Kelly Show and confirmed that all family members, including Savannah, Annie, Cameron, and Tommaso Cioni, had reportedly passed polygraph tests with flying colors. Ayers said it had been confirmed that morning. Megyn Kelly said on air, the polygraph result meant people could finally move on from the narrative targeting Annie and her husband. However, Ayers also delivered a sobering update in the same segment, telling Kelly that sources with boots on the ground told him the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Office currently had no solid leads and no concrete suspects. Savannah Guthrie, speaking to Hoda Kotb, addressed the speculation about her brother-in-law directly. She described it as outrageous and said it piles pain upon pain. She said there was no one who had taken better care of her mother than Annie and Tommaso. That was not hedged, it was direct. Reports emerged suggesting the Guthrie family was exploring the possibility of legal action against Banfield. On March 12th, Cioni attorneys Mark Garagos and Matt Murphy appeared on the Megyn Kelly Show to address whether a defamation lawsuit would succeed. Kelly said she could not confirm the family intended to sue, but had confirmed Savannah was livid about the report. Garagos was clear. He said the reporting was as protected under the law as it could be. He told Kelly that any claim the family brought would be frozen immediately by an anti-SLAPP motion and that a judge would rule they had no ability to pursue a claim as framed. He called it dead on arrival. Murphy agreed. Banfield had been reporting what a source told her, and that is legally protected. The lawsuit conversation ended there. Annie and Tommaso's blue Honda CR-V had been impounded early in the investigation. It was one of the last vehicles Nancy had been in. Odd investigators held it for an extended forensic examination. As of March 11th, the Pima County Sheriff's Department had not returned it. It was reportedly being reassembled at a mechanic shop after the forensic process. By mid-March, front-page detectives confirmed the vehicle had been returned to the family. The impoundment was standard investigative procedure in a kidnapping, where the victim was last seen in that vehicle. The return of the car without charges or further action was consistent with the family's cleared status. Licensed psychologist Dr. Jenny Shields, interviewed by Parade, framed what Annie and Tommaso were navigating as a documented psychological burden distinct from grief alone. She said that when every expression, every silence, and every decision is being interpreted, when the bereaved are forced to manage two realities at once, the private pain of loss and the public pressure to appear as though they are grieving in the right way. She said you cannot fully process a tragedy when part of you is still bracing to defend yourself from it. The public had needed a proximate target in the absence of a named suspect. Annie and Tommaso were the closest available, officially cleared. Polygraph passed with flying colors. Cooperated fully. Vehicle returned. The investigation moved outward. Hundreds of agents on the ground, a helicopter equipped with a Bluetooth scanning device, and a tip line that received more than 31,000 calls in the first 18 days of February alone. The scale of the response that assembled in Tucson within the first days of February 2026 was significant by any measure. 400 investigators on the ground within 17 days. The FBI established a 24-hour command post staffed with crisis management experts, analysts, and agents pulled from field offices across the country. U.S. Customs and Border Protection deployed in the initial surge phase given the proximity of the Mexican border less than 90 minutes to the south. Search and rescue teams worked the surrounding desert. K-9 units covered the terrain around the Catalina Foothills. Drones flew grid patterns. Helicopters swept wider areas. Digital billboards carrying Nancy's photograph and the FBI tip line number went up across Arizona, Texas, California, and New Mexico. The FBI stated publicly that it was operating a 24-hour command post and that someone, somewhere, had the one piece of information that could bring Nancy home. The active tip lines remain the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's non-emergency line at 52-0882-7463. Among the less conventional tools deployed was a Bluetooth signal sniffer mounted on the skid of a Pima County Sheriff's Department helicopter. News Nation's Brian Enton spotted the device during low-altitude flights over the Tucson area early in the investigation and confirmed its purpose. The technology was provided by a company called Bluefly, a product line of Parsons Corporation. Parsons confirmed their involvement publicly, stating that Bluefly units had been deployed at the request of the Sheriff's Department and that the technology provides first responders with a heat map of signals detected within a search radius. In Nancy's case, the device was configured to search for the specific Bluetooth frequency her pacemaker uses to communicate with her phone. The helicopter flew slow and low over the desert landscape in grid patterns. It detected nothing. President Trump, speaking to reporters on Air Force One, publicly criticized investigators for disclosing the existence of the pacemaker signal sniffer. He said that if the person holding Nancy knew investigators were scanning for her pacemaker signal, bad things could happen. Law enforcement analysts echoed that concern. The disclosure was widely described as a potential security error in an active investigation, giving whoever had Nancy a direct reason to neutralize the one passive tracking mechanism authorities had working in their favor. The volume of public response became an operational burden, and the Sheriff's Department received more than 55,000 calls. The FBI received over 21,000 tips. In the first 18 days of February alone, the 911 system logged 31,000 calls, more than 23,000 of them non-emergency. Fabian Pacheco, the chief of detectives for the Pima County Attorney's Office and the supervisor of one of the tip lines, told CBS News that approximately 10% of the incoming leads had any genuine investigative value. The Pima County dispatch manager went on record and asked the public directly to stop calling unless they had specific, actionable information. The lines were being flooded with psychic readings, Reddit threads, social media speculation, and theories from people who had been following the case online and wanted to contribute. Every non-essential call occupied resources that investigators could not afford to lose. On the evening of February 10th, the same day the FBI released the surveillance footage and generated thousands of new tips, the Pima County Sheriff's Department detained a person of interest following a traffic stop near a Culver's restaurant in Rio Rico, Arizona. Rio Rico sits approximately 60 miles south of Tucson, just north of the Mexican border. The man, a delivery driver who later identified himself publicly as Carlos Palazuelos, told reporters he had no idea who Nancy Guthrie was and could not understand why investigators had pulled him over. His residence in Rio Rico was searched under a court-authorized warrant. He was released without charges within hours. Sheriff Nanos confirmed he had no connection to Nancy's disappearance. 3 days later, on February 13th, a separate and significantly larger operation unfolded. A SWAT team executed 2 court-authorized search warrants at a home near the intersection of Camino de Michael and East Orange Grove Road in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood, approximately 2 miles from Nancy's house. The target was a 36-year-old Tucson man named Luke Daly. Daly and his mother, Mary C. Daly, believed to be in her 70s, were both detained at the property while the search was conducted. At roughly the same time, FBI agents in the Sheriff's Department surrounded and towed a gray Range Rover from a Culver's restaurant parking lot nearby, connected to the same operation. The raid went on for hours. Dozens of law enforcement vehicles were visible on the street. Luke Daly and his mother were released without charges. Mas Daly's attorney, Chris Salepi, issued a statement saying his client had no link whatsoever to Nancy Guthrie and no information related to her kidnapping. The Sheriff's Department confirmed the warrant was based on a lead and that the operation had produced no arrests connected to Nancy's disappearance. Within minutes of the raid becoming public, social media erupted with confident claims that the person detained was Tommaso Cioni and that his mother had been arrested alongside him. It was completely false. Luke Daly is not Tommaso Cioni. Mary Daly is not Annie Guthrie. The misinformation spread across platforms within the hour, was shared thousands of times, and generated a wave of renewed public harassment directed at the Cioni family. All of it built on a fabricated identification made by people watching law enforcement vehicles on a live stream. In late March, Scottsdale police confirmed that a woman's body recovered from a canal had been identified as Passion Shirts, 28, a missing person from the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community who had no connection to Nancy's case. The confirmation was necessary because the discovery had generated online speculation. The Sheriff's Department also issued a separate public warning about fraudulent fundraising. Multiple fake GoFundMe pages had appeared claiming to collect money in connection with Nancy's search. The department confirmed that no official fundraising campaign was connected to the investigation or authorized by the family. A department handling one of the most watched missing persons cases in the country was also starting to show cracks from the inside. 400 investigators, a federal command post, helicopters over the desert. But scale and competence are not the same thing. And as the weeks passed without an arrest, without a named suspect, and without a single confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie anywhere in the world, questions began surfacing from inside the department itself about how this investigation had been built from the ground up. On April 2nd, 2026, more than 60 days into the investigation, NewsNation senior correspondent Brian Entin aired an exclusive interview with a law enforcement insider. The source agreed to speak under condition of anonymity, their identity protected and voice digitally altered for fear of retaliation. When what they said was specific and serious, the people who responded to the scene were not tenured homicide detectives. They did not have a lot of experience in homicide at that point. The supervisor, the person placed in charge of the homicide unit for this case, had, from the source's understanding, never investigated a homicide before being installed in that role. When Entin asked how that was possible, the source described a pattern they had observed within the Pima County Sheriff's Department: decisions made by people who install friends and people who can do things for them, as opposed to people who are there on merit and can do the job correctly. A separate source told Fox News Digital that only one detective on the case had more than 3 years of experience on the homicide team at the time of Nancy's disappearance. And these are sourced allegations from inside the department. They are not confirmed findings, but they were corroborated by 2 separate sources in 2 separate outlets, aired on a national news platform, and have not been publicly denied or rebutted by the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Retired FBI agent Diane Coffindaffer had already raised a related question weeks earlier. She pointed out that homicide investigators were assigned to the case on February 2nd. A fact Sheriff Nanos confirmed himself when he announced the case had shifted to a criminal investigation. Coffindaffer's question was straightforward. If the public framing was a kidnapping with a living victim, why was a homicide team activated from the beginning? That gap between what was said publicly and what was deployed internally has never been resolved. 2 unknown DNA profiles, neither in any law enforcement database, is not consistent with a single opportunistic actor. It is consistent with a coordinated 2-person operation. The physical evidence read and the DNA profile point the same direction. The inexperienced team working this case from day one is a factor that shapes how investigators engage with those findings. Then the case against the department became institutional. On March 24, 2026, the Pima County Deputies Organization, the union representing more than 300 deputies within the Pima County Sheriff's Department, held a vote. The result was unanimous. No confidence in Sheriff Chris Nanos. Immediate resignation demanded. The vote was not primarily driven by the Guthrie investigation. It was driven by something that had been buried for more than 40 years. Records obtained from the El Paso Police Department showed that Nanos had been suspended 8 times between 1976 and 1982. A total of 37 days on suspension or unpaid leave, for a list of offenses that included excessive force, discharge of his firearm, illegal gambling, habitual tardiness, insubordination, making threats, dereliction of duty, and improper use of a siren. He did not retire from El Paso. He resigned in 1982 in lieu of termination, with insubordination and consistent inefficiency listed as the reasons for his departure. His public resume stated his El Paso service ended in 1984, 2 years after he actually left. In December 2025, Nanos testified under oath in a separate legal matter that he had never been suspended as a law enforcement officer. The Arizona Republic then published the El Paso records. Pima County Supervisor Matt Hines stood before the Board of Supervisors and said that Nanos' 42-year career with Pima County appeared to be based on fraud. The board voted unanimously to require Nanos to submit a sworn statement regarding his department. Non-compliance with that order could result in removal from office. Sergeant Aaron Cross, the union president, told the board that Nanos had lost the faith of his deputies and his community, and that his past made him unfit to wear a badge. Separately, a recall effort was launched by Daniel Gutierrez, a Republican congressional candidate running for Arizona's 7th Congressional District, citing both the Guthrie investigation and Nanos' conduct with his rank and file. Nanos told KOLD he would honor the will of the people if enough signatures were gathered. On top of all of this, Nanos has been specifically criticized for two investigative decisions in the Guthrie case itself: releasing the crime scene too early in the initial phase and choosing a private DNA analysis lab in Florida over the FBI's own laboratory resources at Quantico, a decision that, according to sources, created unnecessary delays in getting the biological evidence into a usable format for database submission. Then came March 26th. Pima County Sheriff's Deputy Travis Reynolds, 22, was arrested by the Tucson Police Department on a kidnapping charge. The incident was entirely unrelated to Nancy's case. Reynolds was on duty, transporting a female detainee to the Pima County Jail when the alleged misconduct occurred. According to the criminal complaint, he made inappropriate comments to the detainee while she was in handcuffs. He shared a vape pen with her, showed her explicit videos on his phone, and told her he could help with her case and would not be going to court. Jail surveillance footage confirmed portions of the victim's account. Reynolds was immediately fired by the Pima County Sheriff's Department. He appeared in court on March 27. Bond was set at $200,000. His next scheduled court date is April 6, 2026. Reynolds has no known connection to the Guthrie investigation, but a deputy from the same department leading one of the highest-profile missing persons cases in the country, charged with kidnapping while the investigation was ongoing, that landed with specific weight. Multiple voices in the public commentary called for the FBI to take over the case entirely. A compromised lead appointment confirmed by an insider. A homicide framing that contradicts the public narrative. A sheriff whose career rests on 40 years of concealed disciplinary history. A deputy was arrested on a kidnapping charge in the middle of the search. The case itself has not slowed down. The science running underneath it has not stopped. The science running underneath this investigation has not paused for the political chaos surrounding the department leading it. While Sheriff Nanos faced no confidence votes and recall petitions, while deputies described inexperienced teams and concealed histories, the biological evidence recovered from Nancy Guthrie's home was making its way through a process that does not respond to press conferences. It moves at its own pace, and historically, it has proven more reliable than any other investigative tool available to law enforcement. An investigative genetic genealogy does not require the suspect to have ever submitted their own DNA to any database. That is the element most people misunderstand when they hear the technique described. The suspect does not need a criminal record. They do not need to have used a consumer DNA service. They do not need to have done anything at all. What investigators need is a partial match, a second cousin, a great aunt, a distant relative who joined a platform like GED Match or Family Tree DNA and uploaded a genetic profile. From that partial match, trained genealogists build family trees branch by branch, generation by generation, cross-referencing public records, birth certificates, census data, and other available sources until the branches converge on a single individual. The technique identified Joseph James D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, in 2018 after investigators had been searching for him for decades following murders and rapes committed in California in the 1970s and 1980s. A DNA sample from a 1980 crime scene was submitted to a public genealogy database, and investigators eventually followed the suspect to a Hobby Lobby and swabbed his car door handle, later confirming the match with a tissue from his trash. The same technique identified Brian Kohberger as a suspect in the 2022 killing of 4 University of Idaho students. Kohberger pleaded guilty and is now serving 4 consecutive life sentences. He had recent Italian ancestry that slowed the process, but it still worked. That limitation is real and worth acknowledging. 8 investigators in the Nancy Guthrie case can only access approximately 2 million profiles through law enforcement accessible databases like GEDmatch. Even though more than 50 million Americans have taken consumer DNA tests, because major companies, including Ancestry and 23andMe, bar law enforcement from accessing their databases to protect user privacy. The technique also works more readily for people with deep roots in the United States and Western European ancestry. For suspects with more recent immigrant backgrounds or limited family representation in public databases, the process can take significantly longer. C.C. Moore, chief genetic genealogist at Parabon, told the Today Show that if the suspect has deep roots in the United States, it could take hours. If not, it could take years. In the Nancy Guthrie case, there are two unknown profiles, two separate family trees being mapped. The statistical reality of that is worth sitting with. For one person's extended family to have zero representation in any public genealogy database across multiple generations requires deliberate avoidance across an entire lineage. For two unrelated people involved in a coordinated operation to both achieve, that is statistically very difficult. One profile is hard to hide from. Two is a much steeper mathematical challenge for anyone trying to stay invisible. The private laboratory in Florida is still processing the biological material from inside Nancy's home. That sample is complicated because it is mixed. Nancy's own DNA is intermingled with the unknown profile as a result of the sustained physical contact during the removal. Separating those profiles cleanly enough to run genealogy analysis is technically demanding. The estimated timeline from the Sheriff's Department has been up to 1 year. The genetic genealogy process can run in parallel and does not need to wait for the Florida lab to complete its full separation work. But the cleaner the sample, the stronger the genealogy pathway. The Mexico theory gained its most specific public articulation in late March 2026, when Rick Castigar, the former boss of Sheriff Nanos himself and a veteran of Pima County law enforcement, spoke to News Nation's Brian Enton. Castigar said he believed multiple people were involved in Nancy's abduction and that she was likely taken to Mexico in hopes of getting her the medication she needed to stay alive, medicine that had been left behind at her home. He said his theory was that she had passed, that the kidnappers likely had nothing with which to bargain any further, and that he did not know what they had done with her. The FBI took the Mexico geography seriously from early in the investigation. CBS News confirmed that the FBI had been in contact with Mexico's Federal Attorney General's office through its legal attaché in Mexico City and its sub-office in Hermosillo, Sonora, the Mexican state that shares a border with Arizona and sits directly south of Tucson. One source told CBS News the outreach was to exhaust all options, not because there was confirmed evidence. The Guthrie family separately reached out to Madres Buscadoras de Sonora, the organization of searching mothers of Sonora known for locating missing persons throughout the region, asking for their help. And the organization posted a message seeking information about Nancy's whereabouts. Sheriff Nanos' own public position on the Mexico theory was measured but not dismissive. He told media, "We know where Mexico is in relationship to this, and it is a possibility, but we have nothing to indicate that." Those two statements are not contradictory. The FBI contacts and the family's outreach to a Mexican search organization are consistent with a case in which the border geography is being treated as a relevant investigative variable, even without confirmed evidence that Nancy crossed it. Nanos confirmed publicly in a March interview with NBC News that investigators believe the kidnapping was targeted and that they have a working motive theory, though he did not confirm it publicly. Savannah told Hoda Cop it was too much to bear to think she had brought this to her mother's door and that it was because of her. Her brother Cameron had told her within hours of discovery, "I'm sorry, sweetie, but yeah, maybe." Sheriff Nanos also warned the public that the suspect could strike again, a statement that, as one legal analyst noted to the Irish Star, does not fit a celebrity-specific ransom theory, because if the target was specifically the Guthrie family, no one else was at risk. That discrepancy between Nanos' public warning and the celebrity motive theory suggests the sheriff may hold a different view of the motive than what the family has publicly expressed. The FBI is offering $100,000 for information leading to Nancy's recovery or an arrest. The Guthrie family is offering $1 million. The Pima County Attorney's anonymous tip line, 88-Crime, has added $102,500, thanks in part to a $100,000 anonymous donation. The total combined reward is more than $1.2 million. As of April 2026, nobody has collected. The DNA is being mapped. The motive is believed to be known, though whose version of it is correct remains unconfirmed. The location is not known. Everything in motion means different things at different stages of an investigation. In the first 2 weeks of February, it meant 400 people on the ground, K-9 units in the desert, helicopters over the Catalina Foothills, and a command post running 24 hours a day. That phase is over. ABC News reported through sources inside the investigation that the best leads had come up empty and the case was moving into a new phase. Fewer dedicated resources, but a focused, not long-term task force. The Pima County Sheriff's Department issued a statement confirming they were refocusing resources but not abandoning the case. The Guthrie family, according to those same sources, had been briefed that certain key leads were not panning out. What replaced the mass search phase is something more precise. The FBI relocated its command post from Tucson to Phoenix, the Bureau's largest Arizona office, for resource consolidation. A dedicated violent crimes task force was formed specifically for the Guthrie investigation. On March 6th, agents wearing shirts reading Violent Crimes Task Force were seen going door to door in Nancy's neighborhood asking questions. The task force consists of 5 Pima County Sheriff's Department officers and several FBI agents working the case full-time. Former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell told News Nation that these task forces are the alpha dogs of law enforcement, focused, directed, and not scattered. She said their involvement was a positive sign for the case. Several specific threads remain active within that task force. Sheriff Nanos told NBC News in late February that investigators were close to identifying every article of clothing the suspect was wearing, shoes, pants, shirt, jacket, with the intention of running individual retailer purchase record searches on each item, the same way the Ozark Trail backpack is being traced through Walmart. The holster is still being shown to gun shop owners across Tucson. The Florida DNA lab is still processing the in-home sample with an estimated timeline of up to 1 year. And genetic genealogy is running in parallel, mapping 2 separate family trees from whatever partial profiles are currently workable. Then there is January 11th. The Guthrie family's March 21st public statement to KVOA specifically named 3 dates they asked the community to search their memories around: January 31st, the early morning hours of February 1st, and the late evening of January 11th. That third date, 3 weeks before the abduction, a specific 3-hour window between 9 p.m. and midnight, has never been explained publicly. Google initially told investigators the image of the suspect without his backpack may have been from January 11th, before walking that back as unconfirmable. But the family is still naming it. That means something connected to that night remains in the investigative picture. What it is has not been shared. Savannah Guthrie's last broadcast on the Today Show was January 30th, 2026. 2 days before her mother was reported missing. She has been away for more than 2 months. On March 27th, following the final part of her 3-part interview with Hoda Kotb, her return date was announced. She is coming back on April 6th, Easter Monday. Craig Melvin said it directly. She is not going to let sadness win. The joy is going to be her protest. It is where she belongs. It is where they all want her to be, and they cannot wait to welcome her back with open arms. Al Roker noted the significance of the date. Almost symbolic, he said, after Easter and the resurrection, the rising, and that as a family they would hold hands and help her. Hoda Kotb, who came back without hesitation, stepped in without being asked twice, and anchored the desk while carrying her own personal circumstances alongside someone else's crisis, has been at the center of it all. Savannah told Hoda in the interview, she cannot come back and try to be something she is not, but she cannot not come back, because it is her family. She said returning is part of her purpose right now. A special edition of NBC's Dateline titled Savannah Speaks aired on March 27th, carrying the full conversation. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for more than 60 days. The investigation is active. The DNA is being processed. And one date, January 11th, is still waiting for an answer. January 11th is where this video ends. Not because it is the last thing that happened in this case, but because it is the last thing that has not been explained. So every other thread covered in this video has a public accounting. The prop doors have a forensic theory. The 41-minute window has a documented operational reading. The rehearsal house on January 23rd has a confirmed FBI lead. The FBI's footage release has a 3-network correction. The 2 DNA profiles have a lab and a genealogy process. The ransom wallet has a trace record. The investigative failures have named sources attached to them. January 11th has none of that, a 3-hour window, a specific date, flagged by the sheriff, named again by the family in March, and nothing said publicly about what happened that night or why it matters. Whatever occurred on January 11th, whether the suspect was in the neighborhood, whether a camera caught something investigators have not disclosed, and whether it represents the earliest confirmed threat of this operation, is the one detail investigators have chosen to keep entirely to themselves. The Guthrie family naming it in March, weeks after Google walked back its initial dating of the backpack image, means it did not disappear when that single data point was removed. The date still means something. We just do not know what. What we do know is this: the person who took Nancy Guthrie planned this over weeks. They rehearsed a camera countermeasure at a property 6.5 miles from the target. They made at least 2 visits to her front door. They left DNA at the scene. They assembled a kit from a mass market retailer and carried out an operation that investigators have confirmed was targeted. That person left evidence. That evidence is being processed. And somewhere in a public genealogy database, a family member of one of those 2 unknown men has almost certainly already submitted their DNA without knowing that one day it may close this case. If you have information, any information, the FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. The Pima County Sheriff non-emergency line is 52-08-827-463. The combined reward is more than $1.2 million. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. The investigation is still active. Somebody knows where she is. If you watch this video all the way through, thank you. This case deserves exactly that. Not a headline scroll, not a 3-minute clip, not surveillance footage with music underneath it. It deserves the full picture, verified and sourced, and that is what we tried to give you here. This is the Whispered Crimes. If you are not subscribed, this is the moment. The follow-up video to this one goes deeper into what investigators have not told the public, including what law enforcement sources believe may have happened after the border, what the genetic genealogy investigation is projected to reveal, and on what timeline, and the one detail about January 11th that has never been publicly explained, despite being named by both the Sheriff's Department and the Guthrie family in March. That video is coming. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you are there when it drops. Share this video, not because we are asking you to, but because someone watching it right now may have the one piece of information that changes everything in this case. Someone who lived near the Catalina Foothills in January. Someone who noticed something odd that they have not yet decided to call in. Let it reach them. Why, drop a comment below telling me 2 things. Where in the world are you watching from? And what do you think is the single most important unanswered question in this case right now? I read every comment. Everyone. Nancy Guthrie deserves an answer. Her family deserves an answer. And this case is not over.